Hermione Granger had always believed that the Hogwarts library was the beating heart of the castle. Its endless shelves, filled with centuries of wisdom and secrets, had always been her sanctuary. To her, the library was a world unto itself, one where every book contained the answer to any problem, and every corner held a new adventure waiting to be uncovered. Her love for the library was so profound that it often felt as if the very walls had a pulse, steady and reassuring, humming with the accumulated knowledge of generations of witches and wizards. It was here, amidst the dusty tomes and hidden corners, that Hermione had always felt the most at home. Yet tonight, as the moon hung heavy and pale over the castle towers, casting long shadows on the stone walls, Hermione found herself standing before the roped-off entrance to the restricted section, and her heart was pounding for an entirely different reason. She had been here many times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight the air was thick with a sense of urgency, an unease that settled like a weight on her chest. Every instinct told her to turn back, to obey the rules and leave the forbidden area to its mysteries. But Hermione Granger wasn't one to back down from a challenge. And now, something was wrong at Hogwarts, something she couldn't ignore. It was late one afternoon, and Hermione was sitting in the Gryffindor common room, poring over an ancient book she had found hidden behind a loose stone in the library. The book, though dusty and worn, seemed to contain important information about Hogwarts' history, information that had been long forgotten or deliberately concealed. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cozy room, but Hermione barely noticed. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she flipped through the fragile, yellowed pages, careful not to tear them. For weeks now she had thrown herself into research, hoping to unravel the unsettling changes that had begun creeping through the castle. It had started subtly, an occasional, almost imperceptible tremor beneath her feet during lessons, as though the very foundations of Hogwarts were shifting. At first, the teachers dismissed it as nothing more than the castle settling. But Hermione knew better. Hogwarts was no ordinary building, it was alive with magic, and magic did not tremble without cause. Soon, the disturbances grew harder to ignore. Entire corridors seemed to grow colder overnight, filled with an unnatural chill that not even warming charms could dispel. Portraits that once gossiped cheerfully among themselves had grown anxious, whispering in hushed, frantic tones whenever students passed by. Some paintings, especially those in the oldest parts of the castle, had fallen eerily silent altogether, their occupants missing as if they had simply vanished from their frames. Even more troubling were the strange disappearances. Important magical artifacts, many of which had been locked away in Professor Flitwick's enchanted cabinets, were vanishing without a trace. The sword of Gryffindor had flickered out of the headmaster's office for several hours, before reappearing in the middle of the great hall during breakfast, embedded in the stone floor. Rare potions ingredients from Professor Snape's private stores had inexplicably gone missing, only to turn up days later in bizarre locations, like the middle of the Quidditch pitch or the owlery. No one could explain how or why this was happening. Even the castle itself seemed to be changing. Staircases that had followed predictable patterns for centuries began shifting erratically, leading students in circles or trapping them on floors that shouldn't exist. Entire rooms appeared and disappeared at will. Even the room of requirement seemed unpredictable, offering strange and useless items instead of what one needed most. Once, Hermione had opened the door to the astronomy tower only to find herself stepping into a shadowy, unfamiliar chamber lined with cracked stone pillars and a cold, pulsing energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Hermione's logical mind could not accept these events as mere coincidences. Something ancient and powerful was stirring within the walls of Hogwarts, something the professors either did not understand or were unwilling to speak about. If no one else was going to investigate, she would. She had always believed that answers could be found in books if one only knew where to look. And now, after weeks of fruitless searching, this mysterious tome might finally hold the clues she needed. Her fingers traced a faded crest on the cover, an unfamiliar sigil unlike anything she had seen in Hogwarts' known heraldry. Beneath it, a single phrase glimmered faintly in old curling script. To seek the hidden is to walk the path of shadows. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Whatever secrets this book held, they had been hidden for a reason, and Hermione was determined to uncover the truth. As Hermione flipped through the pages, her brow furrowed. The book hinted at an untold history, one that seemed to challenge everything she had been taught about the founding of Hogwarts. It mentioned a fifth founder, a mysterious figure erased from the records, and strange magics tied to the very foundation of the castle. It was a story no one had ever heard before, and one she felt compelled to learn more about. But she knew she had to be careful. This kind of knowledge was dangerous, not just because it was forbidden, but because some truths, once uncovered, could change everything. There was a reason why certain things were kept hidden. The next day, as Hermione was walking towards the library, she ran into Professor McGonagall, who had been keeping a wary eye on her ever since she began her investigations. She had noticed the sleepless nights, the absent-minded murmurs of ancient incantations, and the worried glances exchanged between her and Harry and Ron. McGonagall knew that Hermione's thirst for knowledge sometimes led her to go too far, especially when it came to matters of Hogwarts' history. "Miss Granger," Professor McGonagall had said, her voice firm and gentle, yet carrying an unmistakable undertone of concern. "I understand that you have a keen interest in the history of this castle, but I must remind you that some secrets are kept hidden for a reason." Hermione had looked up from her book, startled by the professor's sudden appearance. "Professor, I'm just trying to understand what's happening. The disturbances, the disappearances. There's something going on here, and I think I've found something that could explain it." McGonagall's expression softened for a moment, but her gaze remained sharp. "I know you are determined, Miss Granger, but there are things that even the most brilliant minds should not seek out. Some truths are buried for a reason, for the safety of all. You must learn to accept that not everything is meant to be uncovered." Hermione, ever persistent, had opened her mouth to argue, but McGonagall raised a hand, silencing her. "I know your heart is in the right place, but the path you are walking could lead to dangers you cannot even begin to understand. Please, heed my words. Not all knowledge is meant to be pursued." The weight of her words lingered with Hermione long after the conversation ended. McGonagall's warning echoed in her mind every time she found herself drawn deeper into her research. But despite the professor's wise counsel, Hermione couldn't shake the feeling that the secrets she was uncovering were more important than anything she had ever learned before. She had spent the last few weeks feeling the subtle tremors in the castle walls, noticing the hushed whispers among the portraits, and observing the sudden disappearance of artifacts from the school's collection. Strange occurrences, ones that no one seemed willing to address. Most students, including Harry and Ron, had dismissed the disturbances as nothing more than the usual quirks of Hogwarts, but Hermione knew better. The school had been around for over 1,000 years, and its magic ran deep. Something was stirring beneath the surface, something old and powerful. That's why now she was here, in the middle of the night in the library, doing something she always wanted to avoid, breaking rules. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her wand. "Alohomora," she whispered, and the lock on the entrance of the forbidden section of the library clicked open with a soft, satisfying sound. She pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make a noise. The lantern in her hand flickered as she stepped inside, casting long shadows that danced along the rows of bookshelves. The air felt different here, thick with ancient magic, and the scent of old parchment and dust hung in the air like a musty perfume. The shelves stretched high into the darkness, each one brimming with secrets and knowledge that were deemed too dangerous or too powerful for the average student. This was a place for the bold, the curious, and the reckless, and Hermione had always considered herself a bit of all three. Her steps echoed in the silence as she moved deeper into the section, the light from her lantern casting flickering shadows on the spines of forgotten books. The deeper she ventured, the more the sense of something waiting in the dark seemed to grow. It wasn't just the books that had a presence here. The very walls of the castle seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if they were aware of her intrusion. But she couldn't stop now. Hermione had read every authorized book on Hogwarts history, every account of the founders, every biography of past headmasters, every manuscript detailing the school's founding and its magical evolution. But what she sought tonight wasn't in the regular collection. No, this was something different, something more elusive. The Chronicles of the Founders was rumored to exist within the confines of this very section, a book that no one had seen in over a century, a book that might hold the answers she was searching for. If there was an explanation for the recent disturbances, it would be here, hidden in the pages of that ancient tome. The search was slow, methodical. She ran her fingers over spines, muttering to herself as she scanned the titles. She could feel the weight of the books pressing against her, as if they were watching her, judging her intrusion. Time seemed to slip away as she worked her way through the labyrinthine rows of shelves, her lantern casting a warm glow against the darkness. It wasn't until her hand brushed against a particularly thick, leather-bound volume that she felt a sudden spark of recognition. Her heart skipped a beat. The book seemed to hum with a strange resonance, almost as if it was alive in her hands. She pulled it from the shelf, her breath catching in her throat, as she carefully opened the cover. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the ink shimmering faintly in the dim light. "Beware those who seek the fifth founder," the book warned, the slanted script dancing across the page like a whispered secret. Hermione frowned, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. The fifth founder? Everyone knew there were 4 founders: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. There had never been mention of a 5th. Why had she never heard of this before? Why had no one ever spoken of this founder? Her pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages. There, in a faded passage, she found her answer. The book spoke of a witch named Seraphina Corvus, a mysterious figure who had once walked alongside the founders of Hogwarts. But unlike the others, she had been erased from the official record. No portraits of her adorned the castle walls. No songs were sung in her honor. It was as if she had never existed at all. According to the text, Seraphina was a master of forgotten magics, ancient, powerful magic that could shape the very foundation of Hogwarts itself. She had been integral to the founding of the school, yet for reasons unknown, she had vanished from history. Her name had been expunged, her existence erased from the minds of all who came after. A small footnote caught Hermione's eye. Her chamber lies beyond the shadow veil where no light may touch. A hidden chamber? A place of darkness? The words sent a ripple of excitement through Hermione's chest. If this chamber still existed, if it had somehow survived the centuries, it could hold the answers to the strange happenings at Hogwarts. Her thoughts raced as she turned the page, but a sudden noise behind her made her freeze. The soft sound of footsteps, the creak of a floorboard. Filch. Hermione quickly snapped the book shut and extinguished her lantern, plunging herself into darkness. She pressed herself against the shelves, her breath catching in her throat. Filch's footsteps grew louder, closer. She held her breath, willing herself to remain still, every muscle tense with the effort. When the footsteps faded into the distance, Hermione allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. Carefully, she slipped the book into her bag, her mind already racing with questions. What had the founders hidden so carefully? And why had Seraphina Corvus been erased from history? What was it that she had done or had known that had been deemed so dangerous that even the records of her existence had to be wiped away? With a final glance around the dimly lit room, Hermione crept back toward the entrance of the restricted section, her heart still pounding. She moved swiftly, trying to make herself as invisible as possible, knowing that she could not afford to be caught. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As she left the library and made her way back to Gryffindor Tower, her thoughts were consumed with the book she had found, and with the knowledge that the secret of the fifth founder was far more than just an academic curiosity. It was a mystery tied to the very heart of Hogwarts itself. And Hermione knew without a doubt that she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. The next morning, Hermione wasted no time. As soon as the great hall emptied after breakfast, she dragged Harry and Ron into a quiet corner of the library. "A fifth founder," Ron repeated, eyebrows raised. "How come no one's ever mentioned her before?" "That's exactly the point," Hermione said, her voice low with urgency. Someone wanted her erased. But the book mentioned a hidden chamber, and I think the recent disturbances might be connected. Harry leaned forward, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "So, how do we find this shadow veil?" Hermione pulled out the book and flipped to the footnote. The shadow veil is described as a place where no light may touch. It sounds like some kind of magical barrier. If it's still hidden within the castle, there has to be a clue somewhere. Over the next week, the trio searched tirelessly. Between classes and homework, they scoured old blueprints, questioned the castle ghosts, and even bribed Peeves with a stash of Honeydukes sweets. Yet the shadow veil remained elusive. One evening, Hermione had a breakthrough. While reviewing the founder's known magical specialties, she realized that Seraphina's magic focused on illusions and concealment. "What if the entrance is hidden behind an illusion?" she suggested. "Something designed to evade detection." Inspired, they revisited every obscure corner of the castle using revealing spells and detection charms. Days passed without success, until Hermione noticed a curious pattern. Several old maps depicted a mysterious gap in the castle's foundation, always in the same place but never labeled. Late one night, Hermione cross-referenced the maps with an ancient journal belonging to a 16th century headmaster. In a cryptic passage, the journal mentioned a doorway that required more than magic to open. It needed understanding. Understanding what? Ron groaned, his patience wearing thin. Hermione's brow furrowed. "It's a test," she murmured. "Seraphina wanted to protect the chamber from anyone unworthy. We need to prove we're seeking knowledge, not power." The clue led them to a forgotten corridor near the third-floor tapestry. Hermione traced her fingers over the blank stone wall. "We need to think like Seraphina. How would she hide something?" An idea struck her. Her focus was on truth and sacrifice. She raised her wand. Veritas Aperio. The wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a spiraling staircase. "It worked," Harry whispered. The air grew colder as they descended. At the bottom, a massive door awaited them, covered in shadowy runes that pulsed softly. In the center, a riddle was etched. "Only those who seek knowledge over glory may enter. Speak the truth you fear the most." A silence fell. Hermione stepped forward. "I'll go first," she said quietly. Her heart pounded as she considered her deepest fear. "I'm afraid that no matter how much I learn, it will never be enough to protect those I love," she admitted. The runes glowed and part of the door creaked open. Harry and Ron shared glances before following suit. Inside, Hermione felt an overwhelming sense of awe as the world around her shifted. The chamber was vast, stretching far beyond what her lantern's light could fully illuminate. The air was cold and thick, as though time itself had stopped here. A profound stillness filled the space, but not one of peace, rather. It was the kind of silence that weighed down on the soul, laden with centuries of forgotten history and buried secrets. The room seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, vibrating with magic that hummed in the very stone beneath her feet. It was a twilight world, shrouded in an eternal dimness. Faint, ghostly lights flickered along the walls, barely illuminating the faded murals that adorned the stone. The figures in the murals were hard to discern, the colors having long since faded into hues of gray and shadow, but there was no mistaking the power that radiated from them. The images were alive, almost as if they moved with a quiet, ethereal grace when Hermione wasn't looking directly at them. Her breath caught as she saw it. Seraphina Corvus. The image of her was partially obscured, her features soft and ethereal, but there was no mistaking her presence. She stood beside the other founders, though in contrast to them she appeared almost ghostly, her form blending with the swirling shadows around her. Her hand was raised high, as if casting a protective spell over Hogwarts, the gesture a silent promise of safeguarding the castle from forces beyond comprehension. The murals depicted a deep connection between Seraphina and the 4 other founders, a bond unspoken but clearly profound. In the image, Seraphina's face exuded a serene power, as if she had accepted the burden of this sacrifice long ago. Her eyes were turned towards the horizon of the castle, as though she had seen the dangers that lay ahead and had already prepared to face them. The other founders were positioned around her, Godric, Rowena, Salazar, and Helga, standing tall and resolute, their expressions filled with determination and unwavering commitment to their shared vision. But there was something different about Seraphina. She was the one who seemed to hold the castle together, the one whose energy emanated through the very stones of Hogwarts. Her presence was a cornerstone, anchoring the castle in ways Hermione could not yet understand. It was then that Hermione's attention shifted to the center of the room. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight of a pedestal, tall and imposing, sitting alone in the center of the chamber. Upon it lay a black crystal, its surface smooth but deeply reflective, the darkness within it shifting as though it held something alive inside. It pulsed faintly, the light within it flickering like a heartbeat, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the walls. The heart of shadows, Hermione breathed, her voice a hushed whisper. She stepped forward, drawn to the crystal as if by some magnetic force. Every instinct screamed at her to approach cautiously, to tread lightly, but the allure of the artifact was irresistible. This was what she had come for, the culmination of everything she had learned in the last few days. The key to understanding Hogwarts' strange disturbances. The answers lay here. As her fingers brushed against the cool surface of the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through her. It was as if the world tilted on its axis, and for a fleeting moment, Hermione felt as though she were no longer standing in the chamber, but swept into a whirlwind of visions and emotions. The room around her seemed to dissolve, and her mind was overwhelmed by a torrent of images, too fast to process, yet too vivid to ignore. She saw Seraphina again, standing tall and resolute, casting powerful incantations over the ground beneath her feet. The earth trembled as though alive, but Seraphina's voice rang clear, calm, and powerful, a barrier rising before her. Hermione's heart raced as she saw the form of a great, formless darkness rising from deep beneath the castle, a creature of shadow, its very existence a blight on the world. It stretched upward, an ancient and malevolent force, its tendrils reaching for the heart of Hogwarts itself. "This is the Umbrathis," Seraphina said. "The Umbrathis," she began, her voice heavy with memory, "is not a creature of flesh and bone, it is far worse. It is darkness given will, a force born from the fragments of corrupted magic and the deepest fears of those who walk these halls. It feeds on ambition, doubt, and desire, twisting those it touches into something unrecognizable. It has no true form of its own, but it can slither into the hearts of the weak. When Hogwarts was young, it crept into these stones, drawn to the power of the founders themselves. It sought to unravel their unity and claim the castle as its own. Her eyes darkened with remembered pain. Salazar Slytherin was the first to sense its influence, but he believed he could control it, bend it to his will. He was wrong. Its whispers deepened the divide between him and the others, fanning the flames of suspicion and mistrust. Left unchecked, the Umbrathis would have torn Hogwarts apart before its first century. The vision shifted. She saw Seraphina again, but this time her face was etched with deep sorrow. She stood alone in the very heart of the castle, her hands raised high as she poured every ounce of her magic into a binding spell that seemed to pulse through the stone, locking the Umbrathis deep beneath the school. The chamber she stood in glowed with an unnatural light, and the walls seemed to scream in protest as Seraphina's magic held the creature at bay. But there was a price. Seraphina's form began to fade, her body weakening as she poured her life force into the spell, sacrificing herself to ensure that the darkness would never rise again. The crystal before her, the heart of shadows, pulsed in response, drawing the last of her energy, locking the Umbrathis beneath the castle forever. The vision fragmented, and Hermione was thrown back into the chamber, her mind reeling from what she had seen. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the terrible weight of Seraphina's sacrifice. The Umbrathis was an ancient evil, a force that fed on fear and ambition, twisting magic itself, corrupting its very essence. It had nearly consumed Hogwarts, but Seraphina had bound it with a spell so powerful that even time itself could not unravel it. The Heart of Shadows, a giant crystal in the center of this chamber, was the key to that binding. The crystal held the essence of Seraphina's magic, and by its power, the Umbrathis remained trapped inside it. But there was something wrong. A tremor shook the chamber beneath her feet, and the walls around her groaned as though in protest. The crystal's pulse quickened, its glow flickering erratically. Hermione felt a cold chill run down her spine as she realized what was happening. The magic that had held the Umbrathis in place for centuries was unraveling. The crystal, once a stabilizing force, was beginning to crack under the strain. Before Hermione could fully comprehend the danger, another tremor rattled the chamber, this one stronger than the last. The shadows around her thickened, and dark tendrils began to emerge from the crystal's surface, creeping along the stone floor, writhing like serpents. The Umbrathis, though trapped, was stirring. Its power had been growing for centuries, and now it sought to break free. Hermione's breath hitched in panic. If the crystal shattered, if the magic that bound the creature was undone, the Umbrathis would be free. She turned to Harry and Ron, who had remained behind her, their faces pale with fear. "We have to act quickly," Hermione shouted, her voice urgent. "The magic is unraveling." Harry's eyes widened in understanding, and Ron immediately raised his wand, his fingers trembling with the weight of the moment. Hermione's hand was already outstretched. Her wand gripped tightly as she faced the Heart of Shadows. "Focus your magic with mine," she cried, her voice steady despite the rising panic. The three of them raised their wands together, their magic converging as one. Hermione's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling back to the incantation she had found in the margins of the Chronicles of the Founders. The ancient spell meant to reinforce the wards in this chamber that had held the Umbrathis in check for so long. She whispered the incantation, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. "Restorare fermer wardum." A powerful surge of energy flowed through the chamber, and the tendrils recoiled as if struck by an invisible force. The shadowy writhing lessened, but it was not enough. The crystal continued to pulse, and the tremors deepened. Hermione felt a deep connection to the magic now. She poured all of her energy into the spell, her mind focused solely on reinforcing the wards that had been placed here so long ago. The shadows fought back, pressing harder against the walls of the chamber, their power overwhelming. But Hermione didn't falter. She couldn't. She could feel Seraphina's presence in the air, guiding her, and with that strength, she pushed forward. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the crystal stabilized. The tremors ceased, the shadows receding back into the stone, and the chamber fell silent once more. The oppressive air lifted, and for a moment, Hermione could hear only her own breath, ragged and strained. The heart of shadows was calm again, its pulse steady, but a faint crack in the surface remained, a scar of the battle that had just transpired. As the last echoes of the spell faded, a soft, ethereal glow surrounded the murals, bathing the chamber in a gentle light. The figures of the founders, and Seraphina among them, began to shift. Seraphina's image seemed to smile faintly, a quiet expression of gratitude, before it slowly faded into the stone, her form dissolving like mist. Hermione stood there, her heart heavy. She felt the weight of Seraphina's sacrifice in that quiet moment, a loss that would never be known to the world. Seraphina had given everything to protect Hogwarts, and though her name had been erased from history, her legacy would endure. Hermione took a deep breath, her emotions a mix of sorrow and profound gratitude. The Umbrathis was contained, for now, but the memory of Seraphina's sacrifice would stay with her forever, a reminder of the true cost of protecting those you loved. And as she turned to leave the chamber, her heart whispered a vow. She would ensure that Seraphina's story would never be forgotten.